Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, Internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you are doing well. And today I'm excited for an exclusive conversation and interview with none other than songwriter, producer, multi-instrumentalist extraordinaire, April Harper Grey, a.k.a. Underscores, whose new record You is out now. I've been loving it. Many people have been loving it. And we're going to talk about the new record and anything else that comes up in the conversation. April, thank you very much for coming through.
Thanks for having me.
So according to you, just straight from you, and obviously this is in jest, but I want to kind of like explore it a little bit. This new record, it is for the girls. The past record, Wall Socket, is for the boys. I sort of wanted to, kind of like, explore a little bit of your mentality around the just deep dive into pop music and electronic music you did. Obviously, those have always been influences in your stuff, but you sort of made a wholehearted embrace of those sounds and those aesthetics on this new record, and wanted to sort of like know what was the cause in your mind for that delineation. Why did you sort of feel the need creatively for this new album cycle to kind of like make that clean break?
For sure. I mean, I would love to have like a super long career, I think. And I think there's a lot of different avenues to go down as a musician, especially someone that's like kind of grown up sort of on the internet with all these, like a million sort of influences at your disposal at all times. And I don't know, I think I would just kind of kick myself if I didn't just do kind of the pop album that I would love, that I've always kind of wanted to do. But that's not to necessarily say that this is like, I'm trying to change my sound and then keep it that way forever. I really do think whatever the next, era or whatever is going to be, like, it'll probably be it probably won't sound exactly like this one does. And I was sort of hedging my bets and just hoping that my current fan base would stick around for a pop-ier album, even though, Wall Socket was just a lot more sort of demanding, I think, of the listener. And I think that brought a lot of people that were looking for that kind of music. I was sort of trying to test the waters and see if, those people would stick around, or if, new people would come in and stuff. But I don't know. I've always wanted to make a more sort of pop focused record, but all my music feels sort of poppy to me anyway. But yeah.
Kind of getting back into the longevity thing. I mean, I feel like you did kind of reference it a little bit there, but digging deeper in your mind, what do you feel like gives an artist longevity? I know you're a fan of people like Madonna, for example. Is it sort of, that constant state of evolution, which with each new album cycle that you feel like is what kind of keeps an artist interesting or going?
Definitely. I mean, I think it's kind of, even the most sort of futuristic stuff, when you first hear it, will become sort of the past within a shorter and shorter amount of time, it seems, as we, get more savvy as like listeners with pop culture and stuff. I think our attention spans for music and art are becoming a lot shorter. So yeah, I don't know. That's just something I've admired, I think, in a lot of my favorite artists, like, especially Madonna, just to see how many different genres and feels and, lyrical themes that she's explored over the course of her career. And she's made some of her best music past, when a lot of people say the sort of clock runs out for pop people, I think. I think there's kind of an urge to try and get your best stuff done in your 20s or something, but that's not the case for her, in my opinion. Same with like Skrillex. I think he's just very good at adapting to new music and new circumstances, and providing like a new twist on it that's kind of novel. So yeah, I don't know. That's something I've admired in all my favorite artists, and those are the artists that seem to last, decades and stuff. So I definitely want, I hope I can have a similar freedom to just try a bunch of different styles and sounds and stuff.
Referencing Sonny as somebody who I know is like a longtime fan of him and his work, do you have sort of like a preference for his old stuff versus his new stuff? I mean, as someone who's been covering his music a long time, I do find a lot of those early singles great. I still think, a lot of Scary Monsters, Nice Sprites holds up. But like simultaneously, I was like really impressed with his latest record, how he just like approached it with a fuck it, like the set is going to kind of be the album, sort of like approach. It was like, it was almost like an aha moment. Like, why aren't more people I know some artists are doing that, but it sort of seemed like for somebody at his level, kind of like an aha moment.
Yeah, I think the only other person I can think of to do something like that was Space Laces. That's like another sort of dubstep artist.
Mm.
That had just been putting sort of all of his like 1 minute demos into like full albums on streaming and stuff. Like it's a really cool idea. But yeah, I think my favorite era of Skrillex was in this kind of in between era where his he had left from first to last and he was
Mm.
like trying to go solo. But he wasn't Skrillex yet. So there's this weird middle ground where he's singing on his music and it's very kind of like still has that kind of like emo sort of like post-hardcore kind of like energy to it, but it's like super electronic and he's gotten into all this different kinds of stuff and he's really into like Bjork and stuff. Like, I don't know. That's a really cool era to me. That's definitely my favorite. But I don't know. I can kind of get with most of his discography, I think. I think there's good sort of good in all of it.
But also as somebody who, has obviously been listening to and making electronic music for a long time and clearly, is a fan of like that kind of mainstream peak that dubstep hit in like the late 2000s, early 2010s. Do you think it's interesting now that like that wave and that genre was just like so derided and so like critically shat on in so many ways and like so many stuffy electronic music fans just hated it completely and hated anything having to do with it. But it feels like in some ways it's kind of like undergone a bit of a critical reassessment and people are just like okay with it now. Or like, there's even records like yours where you'll sort of like sneak in bits and influences and sounds that like are clearly attached to that genre, but either it's not registering or people just aren't having a negative reaction to it because you're just kind of like bringing it in a different context. Like, I don't know. Do you find the 180 some people have done very quietly on that sound to be kind of funny?
Um, Not necessarily, because I kind of agree that a lot of it is really bad.
Mm.
I think like like the thing with electronic music, or I guess the sort of American dubstep scene that I think is really funny is that Skrillex has kind of been this like he's kind of been God or something for everybody. And every time he changes sounds or something, everybody sort of switches to adapt to whatever he's doing.
Mm.
But I do think a lot of the artists, I don't know, I was very into, dubstep, like American dubstep. I was sort of like obsessed with it for about 5 years. So I would listen to all of these sort of offshoots of that kind of bro step thing. And a lot of it is like pretty bad. And I think there's like, it does not hold up. Like the sounds are trash. Like the phrasing is not good. You know what I mean? It's just like, it wasn't very tasteful. So I think, um, more so the shift is not, I don't know if it's necessarily from people that used to hate it and now like it. I feel like it's more so these kids that have grown up like making Minecraft videos and like watching a.k.a. or something and are just like watching all these let's plays and hearing all of this like, Monster Cat, no copyright sounds, music growing up that they like end up incorporating it into their music, whether they like it or not, just because it has like a sort of nostalgic connection with them, I think. At least that's how I view it, but I don't know.
I mean, no, you have a point. I think, there probably is like a likelihood that a lot of people who hated his music early on haven't necessarily grown to love it or anything like that. But, I remember like a very solid handful of years where any moment whether positively or negatively, I mentioned, the name Skrillex, it would always come with like a flood of people just sort of like desperate to show to the world how much they hated him and how terrible they thought he was for music and everything. And it just sort of seems like that's kind of like died down, and people more or less like when he's on stage, like performing with someone like Fortet, it's like, oh, that's actually like kind of cool and refreshing. And, they're actually seen as like, it's like they're kind of respected in the same way, even though they had two very, very, very different like come ups in the electronic music scene.
Definitely. And I think I guess there is something to be said by someone that's like someone that was, I guess, going through that like sort of vicious hate cycle when, a lot of like, I guess us were kids and something, and then coming, a decade later or something and being like, oh, well, he's like a legend or something. I do think there is like something there just by the fact that he's, still doing his thing. But I mean, his music has changed a lot also. It's become a lot less, brash and a lot less colorful. And it's more so like kind of all the mids are stripped out of this new music. And it's like it's almost like a return to sort of UK dubstep a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. I'm more so surrounded by people that sort of grew up listening to and idolizing Skrillex that are like now incorporating his sort of sounds and ethos into their music. So I haven't really seen the shift too much firsthand, but yeah.
Again, I feel like I'm just kind of like nerding out with you a little bit about just a lot of the musical trends of the past like 10, 15 years, just because I know like you've paid close attention to them and obviously is like somebody who creates, but somebody who also it consumes too. And I saw this kind of like take that somebody had offhandedly kind of decrying the fact that like, since Skrillex kind of has had this moment in his career where he's like kind of coasted down and sort of started doing his own thing and not really worrying about sort of like playing to the scene or kind of like, playing to trends, it feels like nobody of the newer generation has necessarily like risen to his level of popularity or like relevance in the scene, at least what it was at one point. Do you feel like that's, I don't know, a sign of something or a lack of a wave for people to ride on to kind of like bring things that high? Or is it just sort of like the state of popularity of electronic music generally?
I think maybe it's sort of a mindset thing. I think there's like a specific kind of electronic music brainworms that can really sort of infect you kind of immediately as like a electronic music producer. Like, I think there is like, I call it dubstep brain, where it's basically like in the dubstep community, at least like in, the mid 2010s or something, you could not share sounds with anyone. You couldn't use samples. It was like you had to create all of these sounds from scratch. You couldn't use like, like drums that someone else did. It was like, there's like very strict rules. It's almost like having like, a ghostwriter as a rapper or something. It's like if you're using someone else's sounds, then it's like who even like, I don't know. So I think that kind of elitism, I think, can prevent people from sort of moving above that. And I think the thing with the thing with Skrillex is I think he works a lot more recklessly than a lot of electronic music producers too. Like it's sort of a main, like, I think a lot of people have said that he like prints almost everything to audio and works like very destructively, where he'll just like, like so some of these sounds are really like low fidelity or something. And I think that's like that's an example of like a very different approach from like the dubstep brain thing, where it's like, well, you got to save all your presets and you got to like, because then you got to go back and see what you did or whatever. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of, I think electronic music can get really caught up in elitism, and that like prevents it from superseding into this, more impactful cultural thing maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, like what Skrillex was doing early on, and even I would argue deadmau5 too, and the progressive house scene at the moment, it was definitely like, for all the criticisms you could make of it, like artistically and commercially, like it was a radical shift from what was sort of like popular and relevant in EDM in the past 10 years prior. Like it definitely did bring a wave of change and had a different mindset and ethos creatively than, you know, a lot of the big stars that sort of like reigned upon the genre prior.
100%. Yeah. I just think the community almost like took the figureheads, like the music they were making and the sounds they were making, and took a totally bad approach to it in terms of making it or something, where it's like no, almost not enjoyable to make or something. It's almost like robotics or something like like math or something, as opposed to, you know, music. And I think that's sort of the main issue I was having, and why I sort of like didn't stay making dubstep for my whole life. I think I was like just getting kind of bogged down by that sort of um mindset or whatever. But I do think obviously the sound has infiltrated. Um, I mean, it infiltrated music in the 2010s, but I think especially now with, you know, PC music and Sophie and stuff like that mixed in, it's almost it's kind of crazy to sort of look at the charts, like the pop charts now, and see what kind of music we're getting. I think if I was like, you know, 16 and these songs were on the like Billboard Top 200 or whatever, I'd be like freaking out. And it really is crazy to see how much these artists have influenced, you know, popular music, even if a lot of the people that are, you know, making electronic music are still sort of like kind of stuck at a certain threshold or something. I don't know. Sorry. That's not
I think you're making a really excellent point there. And it's something that, like, you know, I think I've referenced in a lot of reviews and albums that I've talked about, but I haven't necessarily talked about in sort of like the sense of a broad trend, because yeah, a lot of those maybe sounds in another context that maybe would sort of like reach that next level of sort of popularity and relevance and kind of take over the scene broadly, is instead being sort of like sidelined into a lot of these pop productions, you know, and because it sort of seems like, you know, almost like Madonna was doing during the Ray of Light era, sort of like, you know, having her ear to the ground in terms of like, what are these new and sort of groundbreaking sounds in electronic music currently? And, you know, let me try to jump on these and incorporate these into my own sound. And as a result, like a lot of those sounds that maybe in another context during a DJ set would just purely be an expression of like, you know, what the electronic scene is doing currently. I feel like a lot of fans associate more with pop music now, you know, thanks to records like Brat, thanks to records like yours too. It's definitely interesting in the way that it's kind of like bubbled up.
Totally. I mean, it's such a cool, I don't know. I do think this sort of hyper pop thing will define this decade, I think, in the future. And I think because of albums like Brat and stuff, I feel like it's just the sound of it and the ethos of it have just become so like they've become, you know, popular culture now, which I think is like it's just crazy to witness that and to see it come out of, you know, the pandemic basically, and all of these like 15-year-olds on Discord. Like right. I don't know. It's obviously there's, you know, earlier progenitors and stuff, but I don't know. It's really cool. This is like a really cool time in music, I think. And like a lot of these, you know, EDM producers that I was, you know, big fans of on SoundCloud, and they would have, you know, like thousands of followers or something, are like there's two producers I used to really love that are like making music for like Cat's Eye now and stuff. And it's like just really cool to see their names in the credits and like hear how good the production is and stuff. Like, I don't know. It's just it's a really cool time. I was born in the right generation. I don't think like, I don't know. This is the most ideal time of music for me, in my opinion.
No, I mean, it's for you, it's definitely working out, you know, in terms of like,
I meant like as a listener, like it's like totally.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean,
it's amazing for me. Yeah.
That as well. You know, I think it also, you know, in a similar vein, we're kind of like seeing very unlikely production credits, like with JPEG Mafia on the new BTS album, for example. You know, I feel like it's almost like the insane saturation and competition within the mainstream music field, I think, is like causing a lot of artists and producers to sort of be desperately scrambling for like what's the thing that we can do to sort of define us and make us sound different than everybody else? Because it's like we're literally competing against 24 other groups who are doing a similar thing. And, you know, having someone like Alice Longue Gao do some of the production and writing on a track of yours is like probably one of the most guaranteed ways to sound way quirkier than anybody who's, you know, sort of like going to be compared to you in your lane. It just kind of makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. When Gnarly came out, I was like, my mind was blown. I was like, I remember listening to it being like, this sounds like Alice Longue Gao wrote it. And then I looked and I was like, oh my God, Alice Longue Gao wrote this song. And like, I don't know. I've done a lot of, you know, sessions with them and stuff. And they've like been, you know, trying to get something like placed or like I think for a long time, and I've been doing like years and years of sessions and doing that sort of grind in LA and stuff. So to see that happen, I was just like, wow, this is really, really cool. I think
at first I was offended. I was
only perfect time for it. It was like right then and stuff.
No, at first I was offended. Like, they're ripping them off. And then when I looked, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, Alice is actually in there. But to go back to an earlier comment that you made, because it did make me curious about the record, the music versus math thing. I mean, obviously they share a lot of overlap, but you know, in the most contrasted sense, when you are creating or when you were writing for this record, I don't know if this is something you have to keep in mind, but how do you sort of like make sure you're delineating when you are creating a new song and you are finalizing a track and you're sort of making sure like, am I making music here or am I making math? You know, it's like, do you have to remind yourself to sort of not go autopilot on certain things to make sure that you're getting to where you need to be emotionally on a song?
Totally. That was actually the biggest thing for this last, like my last record. Like I think with Wall Socket, there's almost like it's the process of it, I think was pretty, like it was rather emotionless, I think. I think there are some songs that were, you know, really difficult but I do think that felt very kind of mathy to me. I think that's the sort of boy music, girl music thing that I was like saying in jest or whatever. I do think boy music is very math or something, and it's very like up here. So this album, I just really wanted to try and have like, I called them like body feelings, which is like one of the songs on the, which is like these sort of like pangs of euphoria or something that I get when I listen to music, and it'll only last like 5 seconds. It's like goosebumps or something. Like I was sort of waiting for that for, you know, all 9 of the songs, and that would be the qualifier. As if like, so the song Body Feeling itself or whatever was like, came super late in the process. And I had another song in there previously, but I took it out because I had like a sort of more intense, like physical reaction to Body Feeling, the song. So I think that was the primary goal for this record. And I think the hope was to make it more music than math by doing that. Just because I'm a very, like, I don't know, I tend to overproduce a lot of stuff. And like, obviously some of these songs have a ton of layers and stuff, but I think there are certain coping mechanisms or something that I have as an artist when I'm, you know, unconfident about something, or there's certain tricks I'll pull from that if I'm sort of stuck, and I just really didn't want to rely on that for this album. But yeah.
That kind of physical pang or reaction that you're talking about having, is it generally easy, or how doable is it for you usually to sort of like receive that from your own music? I know sometimes it could be easy to kind of like hear that or find that in music other people have made, but has there ever been sort of like a difficulty or separation there with something that you're making? Is it hard to sometimes take yourself out of the mind of like, I'm making this and all I can sort of like see it as is sort of like, you know, the working sort of gears and, you know, all the things that I've kind of like assembled, and it's like kind of hard to experience it from almost like a fan perspective, you know, that almost seems like a fan kind of reaction, you know, it's like I'm having an eargasm to it or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Like
yeah, totally.
sometimes it could be difficult to have that with your own work because you're kind of like in the process of creating it.
Yeah. And I think it was, but I do think there are moments there's moments in every song on the album where I like
Mm.
got that. Either as I was making it or as I was like, just going on a walk and listening to it or something, where I'd be like, oh shit. Like, I don't know. I think I was really looking for that, and I wanted music that I was super, it sounds like so obvious, but I wanted music that I liked to listen to or something. And I think a lot of my previous music is like, I think there's different purposes for it.
Mm.
Like it's either to, interrogate a certain subject or to, fulfill some sort of like obligation to a story. But with this one, I just wanted to kind of make music that I liked listening to and like dancing around to and hopefully like performing. So that was sort of the main goal. That was one of the main goals for this album.
You were also kind of talking about this record being um, a little bit less of a demand than Wall Socket was in some respects, and I could see where that comment comes from in terms of like it being a more straightforward pop album, and some of the song structures being like more streamlined and stuff like that. But simultaneously, and maybe this is me kind of like misreading it, or maybe the simplification of it makes this element of your writing and album craft a little more obvious, but it felt also like you were focusing a little bit more on kind of creating a story and narrative with this album too. In that sense, do you feel like you became a little bit more complicated in some sense, because the song really does like, or the album really does like kind of flow from the feelings you're expressing at the start of the record to the end, where you're sort of like, kind of leaving things off on this, sort of like a note of yearning and seeing the other person who looks like you and making reference to that, and so on and so forth. That there is a real progression to it. How much of that do you feel like you had mapped out before the album was even finished?
Like not at all. It
Mm.
came sort of towards like 80% of the record being done. And I was like, oh, this does actually kind of track as like a progression of like, a relationship or something. It wasn't written that way. A lot of the songs are about multiple people or, different things or ideas or something. Um, but I was really trying to push back against making like another concept record.
Mm.
Just because like the most demanding part, I think, of Wall Socket was I did an ARG and that was like so brutal to keep up with. And I had to keep up with it for like a year and a half or something. So it was, I don't know. I knew for sure I wasn't trying to do that again. And I just wanted, the next album to be songs. But I guess as, more songs were coming in, I was actively trying to make choices about where I wanted to put them. And like some of the songs I knew were going to be in certain places in the album right after I did it. And I wanted it to flow, but not in a conceptual way. Um, yeah.
Um, you kind of referenced some of the creative processes there, and I wanted to specifically ask about at least one of them, especially the piece, which like the opening moments of that sort of like throbbing series of vocal harmonies that sort of like open the track up. Since the album's release has become like such an iconic sound for the record, and the song almost is like kind of in a viral sense taken on a life of its own, on the internet. I sort of wanted to know, what was your process when creating that? Like, was there a original source of inspiration, or were you working with a simple melody line and just like kind of just continuously layering on top of it? Like, kind of how did that specific part come together?
Yeah, I've said it before. The like primary influences were like Eleanor Rigby and like the Mac like startup sound. I was really obsessed with the Mac startup sound this entire record. I made it playable on
Mm.
certain songs and stuff. Um but yeah, I almost wanted it to be like this sort of um weird ballad, I think, for the record. But I still wanted it to be sort of like at a movable tempo. I also had this idea. I never shot it. I really wanted to do almost like um sort of like a rap style video with all the sort of like Cole Bennett effects and stuff,
Hmm.
and play a version of it of the song with, you know, drums and 808s and like bass and stuff, and have like a crowd going crazy, and then edit it to the version that's like on the, so everyone's like, you know, moshing to some voices or whatever. But
Right.
yeah, I think I don't know. That was sort of a risky one. I wasn't sure how that one was going to go over, and when I was sort of toward the mixing and mastering of the project, I was sort of going back and forth about whether or not I should put it on. But I'm really glad I did. I think um it's one of the bolder songs on the record, and there's certain dynamic things that aren't really present in the rest of the record either. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
it's
I'm very proud of that one at the end of the day, but I was a bit nervous to put it out at first.
no, it's a really bold sound. And like, you know, as I come back to the record, like I look forward to it when I'm done with the record. Like it's, you know, one of the several things like sonically most that sort of like sticks with me like long after. And again, when you say like that Mac startup sound, you mean like that kind of like ghostly hum that, you know, like, you know,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
sort of just kicks on. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Like, cause I suppose like each hit of vocals almost like seems like a small one of those in a way.
Totally. Or
There's
when
almost
you
like kind of
there's
a low mid-range rumble to it a little bit in a weird
yeah.
way.
Yeah, I think especially the third verse is where I've like stacked, I think, over 16 different notes or something like
Oh,
on
really?
top of each other. And I think that was like the main thing where I was like, you know, I really wanted to feel like sort of the Mac startup chord. Um, but I just really like the idea of, and I did it a lot, you know, with Wall Socket, where I just have these vocals essentially providing the bed for the entire song. And
Mm.
they're just sort of repeating over and over. I just really like the idea of harmonizing like a one note melody in um tons of different ways over the course of like 3 minutes. I just I don't know. I was really inspired by A.G. Cook too. He's sort of messed with that a lot. Yeah,
When you're stacking things that high, because again, you're talking about like throwing 16 notes on top of each other, like, you know, when you've reached 12, like what do you know, what are you feeling like is still missing at that point? Is it more like low end, or is there like another note that you feel like adds to it? Or are you throwing things into each channel to sort of like, you know, make it more panoramic? Like how exactly you're kind of like stacking these things up to sort of like get it to exactly where you want it to be?
well, in that part, I just wanted it to be like really overwhelming for the
Hmm.
listener. Like I wanted it to be like too many notes, and I wanted it to almost like sometimes when there's too many notes, it sounds like a train horn or something.
Hmm.
I kind of wanted that vibe where it just was like I'm slamming my hands on the keyboard, kind
If it
of.
doesn't sound big enough, just add more layers to it.
Just add to add more notes, I guess. Um,
Just keep layering until it sounds right.
yeah, but it is only one layer at the end of the day. It's just like how many yeah, how many ways can I interpret the same layer? I don't know. That one is really fun to mess with, and you know, play with the dynamics a little more because I don't know. My music, I guess on Wall Socket there's a lot of dynamics, but when I was, you know, making all of this sort of poppy electronic music, there aren't too many places to get quiet. I think it's kind of it can be pretty much loud the whole time. So
It's true, but simultaneously, I feel like there's so many great sort of either beats or like I'm not sure how else to refer to them, but like, you know, sort of like synth or melody licks on the record where in between notes you'll have these incredibly tiny bits of sort of silence and space to sort of like emphasize the groove or sort of like the stutter of certain lines. And it sort of seems like you still work silence in there. It's just in sort of like a very kind of like microscopic way, like these little tiny slices of space just to sort of like emphasize certain pieces.
totally, I'm glad you said that. That I feel like is like the hallmark of my if it my sound or something, or
Mm.
that's sort of the basis of my production. I think I have been a is staunch the right word? Like a staunch critic of reverb. I don't know if that's the right word, but I
I mean,
hate it.
it is a very
Like,
dry sounding album. So
yeah, I really wanted this album to be really dry and up close. So a lot
mm,
of the record, I'm like, there's a lot of breaths and like I'm like right in your ear, kind of. And um, I don't know. I'm a huge hater of putting reverb on anything for like just to put something on it. And I
mm.
think there's ways to make to like glue the sound of an album together without using reverb all the time. So I think that becomes sort of a hallmark of the sound where I'm sort of leaving a lot of silence in there. Um, I was trying to make it was a very, very concerted effort for this record. I was trying to make um, my vocal performance a lot more like percussive, and I was
Mm.
cutting a lot of like dead air out of all the lines and stuff, and just really trying to take like a razor to each sort of track so that it was very, very clinical. But yeah.
It's funny the way that you're kind of like talking about it. I mean, what like how you were kind of chopping certain things up, and again it's one thing to have sort of like a melody line where all the notes are kind of like flowing into each other, or like you did again to sort of like have those starts and have those stops. I mean, that's typically something that I as a listener and somebody who talks about a lot of music would usually associate as something that would make an album feel really rigid and robotic, you know, to not have like these different sounds kind of melting into each other and flowing into each other. But despite the fact that you did that, it still sounds like such a human album. You know, it's like, was that something that you were kind of like conscious of in the process? Something that you were finding that you were kind of like feeling from the music as you were making it, and you needed to sort of create these fixes to make it kind of like come together in a way that didn't feel so stiff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be still very stiff for a lot of people. I
Hmm.
think that's like a big hang up for some people when they get to my music, but
They're out of the
I
know. They have no idea. They have no clue.
I just think that like, I don't know, the mixing of a project can really um add to the sound a lot
Hmm.
in a way that in different ways. Like I do think bad mixing and someone that's like, you know, is sort of new to mixing adds a whole other character to the music and almost makes it more endearing. And I
Please
think
never stop saying this. Just keep saying this always. Like
exactly, yeah.
anything to work against the mixing meme. Like, you
No,
know,
no. I do
when it's actually important.
I think the most important thing is like if you think that it's like if you want to do it yourself, you should do it yourself, even if it's at risk of making the record less appealing to certain people. It's
Hmm.
going to make it more endearing to the listener, and it's going to let people in on what your ear is and what you like. So if you hand it off to somebody else and then make it, super pristine and clean and stuff, and there's reverb on every track, and there's you know what I mean? It's like gonna that might not be a representation of like that artist's ear necessarily. So I love I don't know. This is just I just wanted it to be as me as it could be, and if that's not gonna it's not gonna work for everybody. But I
Hmm.
really love dry music, so I just kind of wanted to full send it.
No, in a lot of respects, I do too. And you know, I'm respectful, and you know, I understand the significance and the influence that, you know, movements like shoegaze have on some of my favorite music of all time, of course. But you know, part of the reason I have historically been drawn to acts like LCD Sound System is like every sound like individually is so crisp and clear and clean, and sort of seems like it's treated very carefully and placed very methodically where it's sitting, you know, in the mix, so you can sort of like hear it so well in respect to everything else that's like, you know, going on in the song. But, you know, I digress. To go back to your writing, because I mean, we could probably talk about mixing forever. I wanted to talk about Love Field, because I feel like just the title and that as a topic, as a subject matter, is a really interesting, one of the most interesting ideas on the album. And I sort of wanted to know, even though it's like the feelings you're expressing on the song, I feel like are very relatable and are very universal and have been expressed in many songs like hundreds of times over. But I love the fact that you kind of condensed it into this like 2-word phrase and was sort of like wondering at what point did the idea of the love field dawn on you, and what about the dynamic you were singing about made you sort of draw to those words to kind of describe it?
Yeah, that was the first song I wrote for the album, but it was just after. Yeah, it's tricky. It's been interesting to see how people have interpreted it. Um, I think some people interpret me as like sort of the longing one.
Hmm.
Um, I It was kind of the other way around in the situation, and I was sort of imagining this sort of like field that like of my ability to like my capability to, love and be romantic or something seems to like just felt at the time like the field itself was sort of decreasing almost, and like there were only a certain number of people I could let in and stuff. I don't know. But there are a lot of concepts like portmanteaus or whatever on the album where just like weird ways to um describe that, I think, or just like um but yeah, that was just sort of how I was feeling at the time. Like it was like,
In terms of like viewing it as a field for you personally, was it like more of a matter of like, I only have so much bandwidth for so many people right now? Or is it more of like a physical, like literal within a diameter of me sort of thing?
I was imagining like a force field, but yeah, it's definitely like
A force field that people are blocked out of.
Yeah, something like that. I don't
You're
know.
outside of my, you're not outside my love field. You're outside my force field.
You're
Like,
outside of my love force field. Yeah. Like, um, but yeah, it was just how, yeah, it was I was just feeling horrible about having to shut someone down. Um,
right.
and I I don't know. I have a lot of songs that are kind of about that. I'm not a very romantic
You
person,
know,
so it's like, but yeah,
love field sounds nicer than friend zone. So, you know,
yeah, it's true.
it sounds like a kinder alternative.
Yeah,
You know, you're just in my love field right now. It's
yeah,
just, you know, like, you know, so all right. I wanted to also ask about Hollywood Forever, and sort of the commentary that you make on fame and popularity on that track with regards to, you know, clearly you wrote and recorded that album before the record released and before you were able to sort of like see, I mean, yeah, well, there were some tracks that were like doing really well, you know, prior to the record's release, but still, the album has really seen a very impressive blow up in terms of like, the number of people kind of like getting turned on to you and your music through, you know, just how well certain tracks and everything are doing, and wanted to know if like there's been any sort of like reflections that you've had on some of the commentary you've made on that track, or just your feelings on sort of like fame and popularity in general in the wake of, you know, this record kind of like bringing you new listeners, getting the rave reviews that it's received, and kind of like bringing the project to a new level of visibility.
sure, yeah. I mean, I haven't totally processed like the reception of the record just because
Hmm.
we're still like 6 weeks out, I think.
Hmm.
Um, so it's still very new to me, and like I haven't performed any of these songs yet. But yeah, I always have a money song on my albums, I think. It's just really fun to talk about, I guess. But yeah, that song was sort of I was trying to see sort of both sides of it, where like even with, Wall Socket, I was sort of granted um a lot more, was doing a lot more sort of expensive things and going in all these countries and staying in, nice hotels and stuff. Sort of being like, wow, this is very new to me. And then sort of comparing that with like, I don't know, I had a really, fortunate childhood, and like my parents were pretty well off. I went to private school and stuff. So it was like juxtaposing that with this sort of new life. And then if the desire to want like a higher like echelon or something is even valid, and how that if is affecting like my relationships, if at all.
Hmm.
And sort of little things that people would, be like, oh my God, you're becoming so Hollywood. Like it's very, very typical, like, you've changed, man. But um yeah, that song was just trying to unpack all that for myself, I think. But yeah.
Well, the shifts that you've made over the course of your lifetime in terms of, your upbringing, your identity, the ways in which you've grown to music, um, I'm sure there are a lot of ways in which you feel like your life has changed vastly for the better, but are there ever elements of sort of like, where you came from that you feel like ever miss or are, at this point you feel like are residuals from that time period in your life and you feel like you still carry with you in terms of like feelings that you have or viewpoints that you hold?
Um, I mean, I think I've just reflected a lot about kind of the leg up I think I've had sort of growing up in terms of what I do now. Like my dad was a musician as well. So just being in, you know, that house where there's, a computer to use and there's instruments and stuff, I think was just like sort of really fortunate
Hmm.
circumstances to spawn in. And I think like, having supportive parents when I, decided that I wanted to, pursue that career, I think was really important too. So I think I, as I've gotten, further and further into my career, just sort of realized the ripple effects of that, into what I do now. Just being, uh, just how lucky I am to have been in such a conducive environment to that growing up. And I was, able to hone my skills from like a younger age than a lot of people. But yeah.
Yeah, I know that you've, studied music formally and, you pull on a music theory background as well when sort of like composing and creating. But, when it comes to kind of like the raw in the moment process of, any song that you're making, do you feel like, when you are sort of like coming up with certain ideas or drawing from inspiration, do you feel like you're often kind of coming at it with sort of like theory brain, or are you kind of like working more off of like intuition of songs and tastes and sort of like pop music or whatever music in the past that you've kind of like come to love?
I think, yeah, influence wise, it's like it's a lot more about the music, but
Mm.
I'm very conscious of the notes and I'm obsessed with the notes. That was something I kept saying. It's like I can't stop thinking about notes. And like, I don't know, there's the theory is definitely, really important to me. I was super into jazz in high school.
Mm.
And I played piano, so I was a lot of those like voicings and stuff. Um I just really like those kind of clustery kind of chords and stuff. Um it's hard not to think about the theory for me, I think is the thing. But I try really hard not to veer into a like Jacob Collier kind of thing where it becomes like the theory of it becomes like eclipses the music sometimes.
Right, where the theory
And
becomes the whole point.
yeah, and I do think honestly somebody like Charlie Puth is very inspirational to me in that way, where it's
Hmm.
interesting to see somebody that's so obsessed with like like notes like that make um pop music and be like a student of pop or something. That I think is a was a approach that I didn't see too many other people doing.
Yeah, and come across so casual and like he's not overthinking everything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he is. I'm sure he's very like anal in the studio and stuff about it, everything. But I do think, yeah, there's a lot of it is trying to like undo the theory brainworms, undo the dubstep brainworms. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. I
Well, it's
undo
really
my
good that you're. It's really impressive that you're doing so well despite all these disadvantages that you're suffering, all these
well, they're
brainworms
not
that you're
yeah, they're not
that
disadvantages.
you're
It's
dealing
just
with, all these brainworms that you're infected with.
no. It's just yeah, there's just approaches to the music that I try to push back against or whatever. And be sort of try and be more level-headed. But I definitely like I don't know, a lot of my favorite artists seem a lot more kind of less uptight and are more sort of like free with it. And I definitely envy, when I get in the studio with like some other people and see their approaches. I'm like, damn, I need to like let go or something. But yeah.
April, before we head out, just give us a heads up on, where and when you're going to be performing and what we can look forward to around the corner.
Yeah, I'm doing a bunch of shows this year. We're about to start a headline tour in a month, all over North America, and then we'll be in Europe in fall.
Mhm.
I'm doing, well, I don't know when this is coming out, but I have a show opening for Pink Panthers in like a few days, which I'm very
Oh yeah, yeah,
nervous
yeah.
for.
I've been seeing people sort of like throw the poster for that around.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll
yeah.
share that as well.
Okay, hell yeah. But that's about it.
Well, again, thank you for taking the time. The record is so good, and I appreciate you pulling up to talk about it in detail.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.